thing in remember those big milk containers, those tin milk, the way that they did that way back in Europe.
Yeah.
So they put all the documents in there in the records, and he moved it into the ghetto, and all of these people started to pour into the Warsaw Ghetto at that point. They were fleeing from other places because they actually believed that because Warsaw had such a reputation of being the new Jerusalem and sophisticated place, that the Holocaust wasn't going to get into the ghetto. And all of these people started to pour in. Is this simultaneous or?
It is.
Okay. So at any rate, once he was in the ghetto and people were coming in, and this is so fascinating to me. I learned so much from this book, Jeffrey. He wanted to get their stories. And what he observed was that if he didn't get their stories right away, people edited their stories in order to accommodate survival. And this was so fascinating that when they got to the ghetto, conditions were so horrific that they would say, well, where I was before was not so bad, as a way of accommodating and adjusting to where they were. And if they couldn't accommodate, if they couldn't adjust, they were the ones who stood the least chance of survival. And he had to write down where they were because he was one of the few people who realized they were going to be annihilated. This book is absolutely so rich. There's another one.
Carolyn, would you mind saying the book, because people are hearing us and they're coming in to when you were already sharing what you were just discussing?
Oh, Who Will Write Our Story?
Thank you.
And by the way, he did not survive, even though there was another, the Zookeeper, which was made into a movie. And it's about a woman who was really an animal whisperer, and she ran the zoo in Warsaw. And she just had this rapport with her animals. And she was part of the Zoological Society in Europe. And the German, who was the same kind of job position in Berlin, was very envious of her skill. And when Warsaw was invaded, he went straight to her zoo to take her animals. And he said, I just want to make sure they're safe. So he took all her exotic animals and everything. So she used her zoo as an underground railroad to get Jews out and hid them in her zoo. And one of the Jews she wanted to get out was Rosenboom because of his extraordinary work in his history. And in the movie, they mentioned this, but he wouldn't leave. I believe he died at Auschwitz. I mean, he wouldn't. I've been to Auschwitz. I mean, I believe he died there. It's just an extraordinary story of courage. And after the war, the two people who did survive, who were his helpers, went back, and of course the ghetto was decimated, but they found these cans where his documents were preserved. And now recently, I believe in the last 5 years in Warsaw, they opened a museum with his documents. And I am going to Warsaw, I think next May with my members of my family. But I'm going, and part of where I'm going, I've got to see this. I've got to see it. Yeah.
Quite a story.
Yeah.
There was a documentary on 60 Minutes, but if I remember correctly, it focused on documents that had been preserved in Vilnius, Lithuania.
You know, I'm so fascinated, Jeffrey, with how, with good and evil. My background is really in theology, but also military history.
Mhm.
And in the study of war and the study of conflict,
Mhm.
and I cannot comprehend how it is that people think violence is a solution to anything.
Mhm.
An argument, to a political situation. I just can't. And you know, my life as a medical intuitive has been the greatest teacher ever, because I ended up in a field I knew nothing about and learned everything that I know that's of value to me. And the older I get, the more I am available to mystical education, to letting my soul teach me what my brain could not comprehend. And as I look at the world on fire today, I realize I truly believe that we are co-creators, and that all life is about that. God, the nature of God is light, love, and law, and that's it. Light, love, and law. And that there is no off-planet God that looks like us. And we are at this extraordinary turning point where we're about to enter a galactic community, which means all the mythologies, all the Abrahamic mythologies, all the mythologies that God looks like us, and there's a court system that works like ours, and all of this, these mythologies are crumbling. And what will be replaced is this idea of co-creation that we've absorbed into our holistic health model, but we haven't applied it at all to how it is we're creating the events on the planet. We've not extended it because we're so narcissistic. We haven't taken it outside of ourselves and said, you know, well, if I apply co-creation to my health, I better apply it to other things, because that's the way it is. But I look at what starts this conflict, and this conflict's going to get bigger because there's so much more involved than just Hamas and Israel. There's Iran is involved, Russia's involved, all kinds of things, all kinds of players behind the scenes. And think about how when a person is angry, you spark, you have energy, and your energy starts sparking, and it's like sending off psychic free radicals into the atmosphere. And those psychic free radicals are what explodes your energy. You want to explode. Oh, my printer's printing. I'm thinking somebody's in here. And and that explosion, think of all how people, media, political leaders are deliberately fomenting anger. They want to generate these psychic free radicals. And that generates a type of collective force field of fire. And that serves the creation of fire events and fire madness. So anyway.
Yeah.
It's a topic that's very much on our minds as well. I've just uploaded, haven't released yet, a monologue in which I'm suggesting that people who have healing abilities and who are good meditators need to put out the opposite energy to help calm things down.
Everybody needs to think about every choice they make, because if every choice is an act of creation, then every choice you make is a prayer, because it is pure power. Power is the fundamental ingredient of the human experience. All you're doing here in life is experiencing the power that you have. Every act is an act of creation. And if that is so, your choice is to see what level of the building you want to see your life on. On the first floor, you think it's all about acquiring power. But as you ascend in the building that is your life, and every floor you get a different view of your life. And every floor it's more expensive and it's harder, but you see more. And you realize that I have the power to change things, not to take things. I have the power to change the lives of other people. And that is not just meditators, that is everybody. But that's the hardest thing for people to do, is to empower other people. That's the great transition, to go from the love of power to the power of love. I had sworn I had. Oh, yeah. You want to come and organize my office?
It makes me think of your book, Carolyn, Intimate Conversations with the Divine, Prayer, Guidance, and Grace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Years ago, I remember the very first lecture I ever went to. Very first. I was in my late 20s. And someone took me to this lecture to see a guru. It was the first time I ever saw a guru. And all these people were quiet and reverent toward this person. And I thought, who looks like that? And he said, you want to help the world? Become a fully conscious and healthy you. And I thought, well, now those are useless instructions. And now I think, become a fully healthy, empowered you. Become conscious of what you say, what you do, and why. So.
Beautifully put. Emmy, would you like to do the introduction?
Yeah, I am so grateful, and it is my honor and great pleasure to be with Carolyn Myss and Jeffrey Mishlove. And Carolyn and I recently had a conversation about the evolution to holism. You can see that on New Thinking Aloud. Carolyn has been in journalism, has been a really world-renowned medical intuitive for many years. She has worked closely with Norman Shealy, who is a good friend of Jeffrey Mishlove's as well, and who has been a guest on New Thinking Aloud several times. I've had the good pleasure of actually seeing Norman Shealy speak as well, and just a lovely, kind soul. And Carolyn is a 5-time New York Times bestselling author. And one of her books that I have gone back to over and over again is Anatomy of the Spirit. And I regularly recommend it to friends and students. And she has many books here. I'll just name a couple more of them as well. One that we just mentioned, it's the Sacred Contracts, Awakening Your Divine Potential, which is how we title today's live stream. So whatever questions you have for Carolyn today, please go ahead and put those in the chat, and Jeff and I will go ahead and share those with her. And also Intimate Conversations with the Divine, Prayer, Guidance, and Grace, Entering the Castle, Finding the Inner Path to God and Your Soul's Purpose, which I believe is about Saint Teresa of Avila. Archetypes, which I know Carolyn's been putting out a lot of great content on her YouTube channel about archetypes lately. The title of the book is Archetypes, A Beginner's Guide to Your Inner Net. And then also she has another wonderful book called Why People Don't Heal and How They Can. Welcome, Carolyn.
Oh, thank you for that extensive and unnecessary introduction, but thank you.
Well, we're so pleased to have you. And I know when you and I first talked, I had initially wanted to do an interview with you about being a medical intuitive, but that was something that was sort of, you've morphed into how you're working now. Can you just, with our audience listening now, who might be different people than who've listened to that first interview, can you share a little bit about how you got into becoming a medical intuitive and how you're working now with people?
Well, now we're going back. We're going back a ways. I evolved into it. I didn't get into it. I think today, the difference today, and it's worth mentioning that, is that people are choosing to be medical intuitives. And that wasn't true with me. I was in publishing. My goal was, I wanted to be, and this is how God works. I had a lot of ambition to be something I had no talent for, and a lot of genius for something I had no interest in. I wanted to be a great fiction author, and I have no talent for it. But I was born extrasensory. I was just born that way. And luckily for me, I was born into a Catholic family, because it was an atmosphere full of saints and mystics and prayer, with parents who thought that that's just the way the world operated. So as I developed a sensory system, and when my mom and I were driving down the streets and I was a kid and I was reading houses and I'd say, you know what happened in that house? You know what happened in that house? I was just like, I was like this little baby psychic who just, it was so natural. I can't even tell you. You're asking an artist, when did you first spot color?
It's
And
always been with you.
yeah, but I think there's a couple of things that helped out. One, I never thought something was, quote, wrong with me. And ever. And in my house, my mother always said, you have something so rare. She said, now you talk to God. And when you're ready to use that, you're going to know. I always thought everybody else had a problem, that they couldn't see the world the way it really was. That, and I would think, and I noticed from a child on how frightened adults were, how insecure they were, and often how dishonest they were. And I thought, what is wrong with them? What is wrong with them? And so from a child on, I had this perspective. And then the skill kind of sort of went to what I call eau de toilette level. And it didn't hit perfume until I moved to New Hampshire. And I was 29, and I moved to a village of 800 people to join two people to start a publishing company. So my goal was never to be a medical intuitive ever. It was never that. And that's important because of the way your ego works. I never loaded it up with expectations. I wanted to be a publisher and I had to survive. I was living on rice and beans. And one day, my partner in the publishing company said, Lisa's sick. And I was reviewing a manuscript. I was the editor. And I said, oh, she has leukemia. I just knew it. And bingo, I had awakened. And what happened simultaneously was I had met a gentleman who invited me to this conference that was at Council Grove, that was organized by a man named Elmer Green, the late, great Elmer Green, who created biofeedback. And he said there had to be other people like him who by day were scientists and by night were cosmic investigators. And I met Norm Shealy there. My dear, wondrous Norm Shealy. Someone said to me, you should talk to him. He studies people who are medically clairvoyant, not knowing what I was. So I went and I sat down with him. Norm had his glasses hanging off the edge of his nose. He was peeling an apple. And I said, Dr. Shealy, could I talk to you? Sure. And I said, I think I'm one of those people. And Norm, who was from Harvard, PhD, MD, brain surgeon, says, how good are you? And I said, I don't know. And he said, look, I don't need someone to tell me someone's energy is off. I can do that. And I said, I don't know. He said, can you see people at a distance? I said, I don't know. And he said, all right, I'll call you sometime. So a few weeks later, Norm had his clinic in Springfield, Missouri, and I went back to Walpole, of course. And he called, and I did my first reading. And he said, what kind of information do you want? And so we immediately established our protocol. He had the patient in the office. And I said, just give me a name and age, I guess. And so we always had the permission, name and age. I'm not an astrologer, so I didn't do a chart. I didn't get a birth date, time, any of that. And so I said to Norm in the very first reading, I said, all I'm getting is that there's concrete in the person's esophagus. That person had throat cancer. Okay, from there, one reading led to another. And here's many important things I think that are worth mentioning. One is I knew nothing about anatomy and physiology. And two, I didn't have an internet. This was pre-internet. So I did not plug myself into myself every morning to see how popular I was. So I spent the next 10 years doing 8 to 10 readings per day with Norm in silence in this quiet little village in New Hampshire. I didn't pay attention. There was no big audience that I wanted to become good at this because I was dealing with someone's life. And I started out with the idea, and it was important that I didn't even know there were chakras. I knew nothing. And so every reading was a discovery. And these were the assumptions I made, that everybody wanted to heal, that everybody was eager to do anything they could to get well, all of which I learned was not true, which then opened the next series of questions, which is, why don't you want to heal? What's really going on? And from that came the next series of questions, which is, what goes on with us? And then I realized that the fundamental ingredient of life was really power, our power, and how we manage it. And that the source of our suffering, there was illness and then there's suffering, was really not knowing how to manage ourself and the journey of life, and going from this involvement of survival, which is the first stage, to the essential recognition that I cannot compromise my power in order to survive, because I will hemorrhage. And then the role, eventually, as the years went by, the role of faith, not religion, let me repeat that, but a sense that there is something greater than me that is in charge of this journey of life, to which I am accountable, and that every choice I make matters. And that's when I eventually realized this is a very impersonal universe. There's nothing personal about it. You jump, you fall. That's the law of gravity. This is a system made up of laws, then therefore God is law. But it is a very intimate universe, and that every choice we make matters. Every prayer is heard. So that's when I realized I am walking through all that is God. It is all holy, if I could see it that way. So that is the story.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And now you are working with people in groups, and your work has morphed to just.
I prefer evolved.
Evolved. That's, yeah, exactly. Evolved.
Yeah.
So we're having some questions coming in here, and somebody's YouTube name is Design Ideas, and they say, hello, New Thinking team. Carolyn, what are the common challenges or obstacles you have seen in individuals trying to fulfill their sacred contract?
First of all, understanding that what a contract is. And that the first stage, let me put it in stages. The first stage is the ego. You're going to set up your life according to your ego. You're going to do that. You're going to set it up for what you think will enhance your physical life. That's just logical, because you want to touch life, you want to have life, you want to taste life, you want to smell it. And so this is the level where you fantasize about what will bring you everything you're convinced you need or want for your life. So this is where your myths, your archetypal myths kick in. This is where your fantasies, and this is also where your wounds kick in, which is why wounds are so dangerous to listen to. This is where your experiences of humiliation kick in. I've got to do this so I won't be humiliated. I have to have this, so I have to have designer clothes so I won't be humiliated. The fear of humiliation. So that sets up the first stage of what you think. So what my point here is that contracts are obligations, and they're numerous, that your soul has to do, not your ego. Not your ego. But when your ego is strong, you'll go through a stage of choosing your first life, and you will fail. You will fail. Fail is a second stage. And failure is essential. It's essential. And then the third stage of that, like how many people marry for money? They really don't have love. How many people take jobs for security and it's really not what they want? They don't have a contract for that. They're just frightened. How many people negotiate their power, say anything just to stay where they are? They will fail because they're not under contract to do that. A contract is a soul obligation, not an ego one. And then you move to the third stage, which is the humiliation. I can't seem to find myself. And then you move into the retreat, the breakdown, the dark night of the soul. And then you get the calling, where you are done choosing your life. And what happens is your deeper self is able to come out. And you realize, I'm not arguing anymore. I don't have anything to argue with. And eventually what evolves is what it is, your charism, the grace in you were born to share. And that's how it really happens.
Well, it seems that it's also people getting real with themselves and being their authentic selves.
But how do you get to that authentic self?
Yeah,
those are the stages.
Yeah.
You just can't decide now I'm authentic. It's not about speaking your wounds. It's you're broken to get to an authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
That's a battle.
Yeah, definitely. Jeff, do you have any comments or did you want to ask a question?
Well, I'll go with a question. I'm still sort of trying to figure out how those stages might apply in my case. I'm not sure, but I'll think about that for a while. And here's a question from Suzanne Taylor, who is one of our friends and who is often a person who poses questions during our live streams. Suzanne says, referring to herself here, "We are of an age that makes me bolder about ideas I have, where it's now or never to get attention paid. Is there anything you want to accomplish before you leave, and are you amped up to deliver it?"
Wow. Is there anything I still want to accomplish? Yes, there is. And hopefully I am bold enough to deliver it. I do want to try fiction. And I do hope to be an even bolder agent for positive change in this world, because I believe more deeply now than I ever have before in what I teach. I only teach what I deeply believe. I always have, but the difference is I believe so deeply in the power of each human being. And if I could inspire people to believe in themselves as much as I believe in them, then I really, truly, I would just feel better.
Yeah.
I mean, I really learned, from my work in one book, Invisible Acts of Power, that everything we really do to each other, with each other, makes such a difference, and that our understanding of power is so primitive. You go from thinking that power is money. You've got to have money, you've got to have fame. But if you really look at your life, all that you really value is invisible. What you really value, you value love, the things that really, really matter. Compassion, love. Think about when your life is going through a difficult time. You may need money, but first you have to find someone who's compassionate enough to realize that. So the real gift The real gifts you can't put in a box. Their love, their compassion, their kindness, their patience. They're the graces of the soul. And the power of words. I realized that you can destroy a person with one word. You can look at a person and go, oh, and boom, that person's crushed. The power people have. And if they understood you have that kind of power, like I said to people, you don't have a vocabulary powerful enough to heal. The words you use and the way you speak to yourself, how you talk to yourself are so hostile. If I could just exorcise your vocabulary, so.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I admire your work is that, and especially in Anatomy of the Spirit, it really struck me that you talked about each chakra as an area of power that we have.
Yeah.
And another viewer, Blake, is asking, on a soul level, why is it so important to not give our power away? In this life, it makes us unhealthy or unhappy, but what does it do to us on a soul level?
Well, look at, that's such a great, big, huge question. Unfortunately, I'm not good at answering questions briefly, but I'll do my very best here.
Take as much time. Yeah.
When I do a medical intuitive reading, what I realized was I was tracking where your power was. I was tracking where you're hemorrhaging. I was tracking where you, if I had to use an analogy, imagine that every day we get $100 worth of power. And every day you have to distribute that, you budget it. And if you were still lamenting something from your past and still angry at someone and still holding on to something, all of that's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you money. And that money is symbolic of your energy. It's going to cost you energy. So you have to distribute $5 worth of your energy to this memory and $6 worth of energy to this story that you keep repeating. $20 to this wound you keep talking about. And by the time you get to what's left to run your bio-spiritual ecology today, your creativity, your thought process, your vocabulary, you're down to maybe $18. Now, to be a healthy person, you got to be over $50 worth of energy. All right. So now with that money, with that energy, you've got 18 units of energy to operate all the laws in the universe that are working with you, cause and effect, action and reaction. Now, what happens? You have to borrow juice from your cell tissue. You have to borrow stored energy in your cell tissue. This causes aging, but your cell tissue keeps track because your biography is in your biology. It keeps track of where the debt is. Ergo, this is one of the reasons people are talking now. They'll say, I have to get my power back. I have to get my power back. We know it. We don't know why, but we know it. Do you think people used to talk that way before World War II? Nonsense. They never did. They would say, I've lost my respect, blah, blah, blah. But now we recognize, not consciously, but we're totally in an energy era, that somehow we are responsible for a bio-spiritual energetic network, which is ourself. And that this is the reason we've gone into narcissism. Not so that we have to become hyper aware that we're responsible for this energy field, this soul field. The word energy bores me to death because there's no sacred connotation to it. It doesn't mean anything. So you are responsible for the power of your soul and how you've distributed it and the missions you've sent it on. And that's why if you look at all the holy scriptures, there's always this ritual at the end of your life. Do you have anything to say? You want to go to confession? Do you have a last word? Do you have a potlatch dinner with the Inuit, a potlatch ceremony with the Inuit? Take your spirit back. Finish your life consciously. so that it's not left behind. Life's a big deal. But what makes it a big deal is that it's this profound creative adventure. And this is why I realized as a medical intuitive that one of the turning points in a person's life is realizing I do not esteem myself, self-esteem. But what self-esteem is the realization of I have no esteem for myself. And what that means is I look to others to approve of me, which means I will say anything to get their approval, which means I will lie. I will agree with things I do not agree with. I will negotiate my integrity in order to get approval. Approval from whom? Okay, but you will do that when you don't esteem yourself. You will bargain away your creativity. You'll bargain away your self-worth. And what that leads to is self-loathing. And what that leads to is anxiety, depression, and despair. And so in order to live with that, you have to find someone to blame. Go to your childhood. Must be your parents. Yeah. It's a big cycle. So you've got to develop a sense of self-esteem and really get that it's not about telling people, this is what I think. It's about realizing I'm not going to use my power for this. I'm not going to lie. Liars don't heal. Liars cannot advance their consciousness. They live in a world, they bargain with darkness, and that's their partner. We're in trouble in our world right now, I can assure you that.
Earlier, we used the phrase before, I think we formally began the program, the world is on fire. And
Yes.
it sure seems that way today with the new war in Israel, with the old war in Ukraine, with the political polarization across the United States and other countries. Is it related to this conversation you just had about people giving away their power and becoming dishonest in order to curry favor?
You know, Jeffrey, that kind of question has to be answered on numerous levels. There's not one answer for that. And I think, you know, when I'm in a classroom with people, I always begin by drawing a 12-story, the frame of a 12-story building. And what I tell people is, this is you. When you're born, you have a frame. You're born in a certain place. I'm born in Chicago. I can't change that. I'm born in 1952. I can't change that. So this forms the structure of my building. You have a structure in your building where you were born and the year you were born in, et cetera. So this is our structure. And our only journey then is what floor will we live on? And on every floor, we see a different vista of our life, the size of our life, how many people, the population. And on every floor, it gives us a capacity to add more knowledge to answer a question like that. So on the first floor, all I see is across the street. And so I would answer that question saying, it's this person's fault, it's that person, it's Hamas, it's that, it's this, blah, 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 right? I would just do that because that's all the information I have. I go with information, not truth, but information. But then I think to myself, wait a minute, what about history? What about this? What about human nature? What about people's private agendas? What about the unthinkable? What floor is the unthinkable on? Because this is the thinkable. Can I possibly consider the unthinkable? Well, that's like floor 10 or 12. Can I get up there? Because in order for me to get up there, I have to get very impersonal. I have to get very impersonal, and I have to be able to engage. How do the laws of creation work? How does evolution work? I have to involve other assets of thinking that are not available on the first floor. The radar's too small. On this floor, I have a universal Wi-Fi. But in order to get there, I have to become impersonal. I'm asking the question. This is the difference on the first floor. Like you ask, what's the purpose of my life? But if we get up here, we say, what's the purpose of life? And let me understand that, because that helps me understand what you want me to do with my life. Because this life is not about me. I'm about life. So when we get up here, we have to look at what great, big, huge changes are happening that are organizing the dynamics that are happening here. Well, we entered the nuclear age. How in the world does that have anything to do with this? Well, there are two fundamental wheels in us. One is the need to survive, and one is the need to create. And in entering the nuclear age, we created a level of destruction that we have no way of getting out of. There is nothing we can create that can outrun our capacity to destroy. Now, the only way we can cope with this is to evolve into a species incapable of using it. So from that point on, we entered an age of consciousness where the template, the dictate from the cosmos was become whole. You better become whole. You better understand how this world works in a very different way. It isn't about separation and domination. It's about integration and cooperation. So from that point on, the forces at work behind the scenes have been moving us toward a place we don't want to go, which is become whole, become a planetary community, operate with a very different consciousness. So we have global pandemics, we're having global crises, we have environmental problems, we have global refugee problems. Everything is global now. We no longer have problems, we have predicaments. Problems have solutions. We cannot go to a glacier and say, you've signed this treaty and by God, you better stop melting. We can't do that. Everything requires global cooperation. And the other force is this force of darkness. That is absolutely not, because that will change economies, that will change power levels, that will change how the fact that we have to see each other differently. That will, in the meantime, people have stopped attaching themselves to holy mythologies and have turned to fundamentalism, which is a devil's weapon. It is the base. It is the politics of a made-up God in order to wage war. And that's more powerful than the mystical idea, because all the holy teachings are about love. So it's the light versus the dark. So we're in trouble.
Thank you for that.
Elegant explanation.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Carolyn. There's another viewer who, Kiran Barara McCourt, who asks, do you think people confuse self-love for self-esteem?
That's an individual. I don't know. That goes one-on-one. Okay. It can be confused. Mm-hmm. But then I have to say, what does someone mean by self-love? And so I can't answer that for everybody. That's individual.
Yeah.
Do you confuse self-love with self-esteem? Not people. Do you? Don't ask on behalf of anyone else. Ask for yourself.
I hear from people who, when we talk about self-love or self-esteem, they tend to confuse it with egotism. They you don't want to be too full of yourself, and as a result, they get turned off to the whole idea, because I think they misunderstand it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. But they don't. I think everything goes in stages. everything is like the first level of, my experience is nobody just wakes up and says, I'm full of self-esteem. It goes in stages. And I think the first stage of this journey of self, of the inner self, is revolution. Because you stage a revolution. Some part of you wakes up and says, the I is born in a way that it hadn't been born before. The inner I is born. And the I says, you know what? I'm not going to take this anymore. You finally stand up for yourself and acknowledge a self that has a presence that isn't your external presence, but it's an inner presence. And it says, I can't take it anymore. So you stage a revolution. And during your revolution, you acknowledge what it is you can't tolerate anymore. I won't be hit anymore. I won't be in a battered relationship. I won't. The second stage, when someone's in the revolution, that's not the stage where you say to them, well, what is it you want? They don't know, actually. 90% of the time, they don't know. All they know at that point is what they don't want. So then comes stage 2. After the revolution, after the vomiting, comes the involution. Leave me alone. I got to get out of here. I got to get out. And then they go on their walkabout, inner walkabout, outer walkabout. They have to involute. And that can take who knows how long, week, days, months, years. But after that, the next stage, which is the narcissism stage, where they start piecing the new identity. And the identity at first is going to have to be as external as it is internal, because they're going to peep out and return to their tribe and announce there's someone new. And it's at this place, maybe they're dressing differently. Maybe they've gone blue with their hair. Maybe they're wearing beads. Maybe they've got an orange top, but they will announce themselves. And this is their first stage of the new self-esteem. It's defiant. They have to put on the billboard that I'm not like you anymore. Do you understand that? So this is the first stage of detaching from the tribe. And it's got to be done in this sort of public display, because it's so hard to detach from tribal consciousness. It's so difficult because the tribe rarely supports your exit in this way, because it's saying, finally, you're not like us. By God, I knew you'd figure that out. Tribes don't do that. Tribes want to keep, because their survival is in numbers. And it's at this stage where you start accessing wounds and feelings and an inner life and an inner self that you didn't have access to before. Because when you're in the tribal mind and you say, I was really hurt, he didn't mean that, he didn't mean that, he didn't mean that, things were dismissed and oftentimes repressed. This is where you come down, you report that your uncle slipped into your bedroom at night and shh, don't you talk about that. But at this stage, when your inner self starts emerging, you start speaking about, oh my God, I wasn't imagining. This is where flashbacks start. This is where the journey of healing starts. And that's why this is the stage that also has these little micro stages, which is this delicate emergence of, wow, I put up with a lot. And this stage requires a lot of support. But as I say to people, this is the stage where you start realizing I can articulate rules for my life, not laws, but rules. There's a difference that I couldn't have in the tribal. I can say I need my own space. I realize that for my health, I can't be around this. You start realizing that your inner world requires stuff. And so you start taking stages to protect yourself, to heal yourself. And from this comes this thing called esteem. And oftentimes in this stage, people associate esteem with, and I have a right to say this, and I have a right to say that. You don't have a right. You want to, but it's not a right. There's no right. Nobody gives us a right to do this. But eventually, you're supposed to progress through that. You're supposed to absorb this behavior into yourself, not out of yourself, and move on to evolution, from narcissism to evolution, to realizing the reason I am becoming empowered is not to serve myself or serve my wounds, but to serve others, to serve life. And that's the stage a lot of people don't make it through.
What do you think?
Oh, go ahead, Emmy.
I'm sorry, I was gonna say, what do you think would help them through that stage, Carolyn?
Well, I wrote Why People Don't Heal.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's very hard to stop indulging woundology, because there's so much power in wounds. Our whole society now is set up to support wounds, wound groups, support groups, It's so, anytime someone uses their health as an excuse not to do something, I have a headache. If you don't have a headache, don't use it. Don't use a wound. But I also think we don't have the right approach. I'm doing a workshop. I'm starting a class this week. I'm not the main teacher. The main teacher is Thanmeet Sati. She's a physician. And she has 3 sons. And just as she was 9 months pregnant with her 3rd son, she learned her 2nd son had a terminal illness. But she just released a book called Joy is My Justice. And in it, I mean, one of the points that is richly, we're going to make in this class, is that this polarity, that you're either healed or you're not. You're either happy or you're sad. You cannot be both simultaneously. Is a product of polarity thinking, which has totally formed the Western mind. You're either good or you're not. This is, I either win or I lose. There's nothing in between. There is no third option. There's no synthesis. And that is not true. I think what someone needs to move on to is that deep wounds will always be with us, but there must come a point where they can't control you anymore. They influence you. They have formed you, but control's a different thing. And there comes a place where you simply stop involving them in how you make decisions and how you treat others. And I remember there was one person said, kind of started losing her temper with me at a workshop. And I said, why are you getting so angry? And she brought out a wound. And I said, I wasn't there for the wound. So I don't want to hear about it. I actually don't want to hear about it. That wasn't my wound. That wasn't my experience. So why are you bringing it here? And it was like throwing ice water in her face. It was like breaking a spell. And I said, now do it again. But I don't want to hear about your wound. It has nothing to do with me, nor does this anger. This does not belong to me. You know, so part of self-esteem is being able to say, I am not going to be part of this anger drama. I'm not. You may have had a bad time here, but you don't get to use that as an excuse to abuse me. Yeah, it's not going to happen. And so that's how you do it. You have to make some tough decisions for yourself as a way of breaking wound patterns that are very codependent. Remember that wounded behavior is very protective and codependent. And the other side of it is guilt. Oh, I can't do this. He's so wounded. She's so wounded. Well, yes, you can. You can say that. You can break off a wounded pattern. It depends on, so many people do not want to heal, and that's part of it. They don't want the consequences of making tough decisions. And there you go.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff. You were gonna.
Okay, Susan Forst, if I remember rightly, Susan has been a member of our volunteer team. And it's almost as if she's concerned that the question might sound too blunt, and but I'm just going to read it anyway.
With me? I don't think so.
She says, how do you understand the life challenge of a child abused by its parents? And how do you understand the child's responsibility in that circumstance?
Well, first of all, what kind of child are you talking about? A 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old? What are you talking about?
Let's say a 4-year-old.
Well,
And I think she was also, she kind of has some more comments in here. I think it was in the context of a victim not being blamed for, there's like victim shaming and blaming these days. So I think she was curious, what is the responsibility then of somebody who has been abused? Is my understanding of the question.
what do you mean? What is the responsibility of the 4-year-old? What does that mean? I don't know. I mean, what is she saying? Is she saying?
Would you say that when a child is born,
Yeah.
you talked about the idea of a contract.
Right.
Is it possible that a child before being born might engage in a contract where they're going to say, for the benefit of your soul, you're going to go through a period of abuse?
Okay. All right. Here again. I cannot answer that in a way on the first floor that will ever satisfy anybody, any more than I could answer people right now who say, why was I listened to an interview before on TV about what's going on in Israel. And this man, his wife and 2 daughters were kidnapped. And so they're now in Gaza, and who knows what shape they're in. And if he said, you tell me what kind of God would allow this, right? Okay, so we need to get off the first floor and get on the floor of the inconceivable, unthinkable level of consciousness. Which brings to mind the story of Krishna and Arjuna. And they're on the edge of a battlefield. And there's going to be a huge battle the next day. And Arjuna says to Krishna, I feel like the fabric of the universe is about to be torn apart. He said, my family's on the other side. And if I go to battle tomorrow, I will kill them all, and my karma will be horrible. And if I leave the field, my dharma, my contract will not be fulfilled. I don't know what to do. And Krishna said, you go to battle, because that's what you have to do. And God has already taken care of. There'll be other lives and other times. Don't worry about it. Now, we measure life by every single event, but that's not the mystical scale. That's not the mystical scale. If we get up to a floor that people don't like, which is the floor of human nature, and how we all participate in this evolution of human nature, on that floor, we realize we're all evolving as a species. And we are still a species that is basically predatory, basically cruel. We still kill our young. We still do the unthinkable. And so when we actually witness these acts, we think, how could this happen? Because we should think that. And that's what awakens the evolution in us. Someone should do something. Well, why not you? You're the one seeing it. But until all of us awaken, these things will happen. You don't look at it like, did that person choose? There is personal contract and there are collective contracts. What is in one is in the whole.
I guess it's fair to say we all at some point agreed to be born on this planet.
This is not a sophisticated planet, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
We still think killing is a solution. Don't be ridiculous. We celebrate the fact that we have weapons that can destroy us. Who does that? Who does that? I mean, we are the most well-armed country in the world. Everybody's got guns here, and we think that's a good thing. The stupidity of the human race boggles my mind. And then we ask a question like, how is it we would kill a child? Are you kidding me? All we do is watch violent movies, violent stuff. We celebrate violent actors. We eat, drink, breathe violence. And we just can't get over it. Oh, please.
One of our viewers is asking, Sophie McGuire says, hello, Carolyn. What is woundology and what surprised you the most about healing?
Woundology is the practice of using your wounds as street currency, of deciding. I mean, I had such an awakening years ago, which inspired the book. When I, as I said earlier at the very beginning, when I got into my work as a medical intuitive, I really did believe everybody wanted to heal. Who would not want to heal? Who would not want to get out? And then I realized, in fact, becoming a whole healthy person is the challenge of life. And so there's nothing simple about healing, but the physical illness is the caboose on that train. It's actually becoming an empowered person that's the greater challenge, because it involves everything. It involves your relationship with truth. It involves your relationship with yourself. It involves your relationship with the nature of God, how the universe, power, everything. And so the only way to slow that down is to hold on, and I do mean slow it down, is to hold on to your wounds, because wounds give you psychic weight, W-E-I-G-H-T. And the more psychic weight you have, the longer you have to W-A-I-T for everything. The slower the laws of the universe work, because you've burdened them with your psychic weight. And let me give you a way that works. And this slows down the speed at which you get something, the speed at which something registers in your head, the speed, in other words, of light. So instead of getting something at the speed of light, you get it at the speed of lead, which requires you to move at the speed of the tribal mind, which gives you great cover for the excuses, for the way you think, well, that's what everybody says. So instead of stepping out and being able to see the world from the top floor of your building, see it like nobody else, see it like a mystic, you go down and you decide to see it like everybody else. Well, everybody hates them, so it's okay. Everybody feels this way, so it's okay. So you can hide in the collective. And in order to stay in the collective, you have to stay wounded.
All right.
I've got a question here from a viewer whose YouTube name is James Justice, who says, I want to be able to heal people. How do I go about transcending to a better understanding of my true self?
Well, my first question, if I was his spiritual director, would be identify where you are incongruent. Identify where you are incongruent in your life. And that what you say is not what you believe. Identify where you compromise yourself. Identify, pay attention to why you do what you do. And when it lacks integrity, do something about it.
It's a very straightforward answer.
It's the only ones that count.
Looking at some of these questions coming through here, and one person who I think, we asked a question, this person asked a question about self-love and self-esteem. So this is Kieran Barrera McCourt, who asks, is ego in the service of fear?
Well, yeah. Yeah. I mean, the ego is in the service of protection and in the service of instinct, the lower instincts. So the survival instincts, that's the first level of guidance, is your survival instinct. It's organic divinity. It's God in your blood and bones. And so your ego is your first line of defense. It's your first sense of who you are. So it's not the enemy. It's not the enemy. It's your ego's your first sense of identity. But then think of it as job. So ego has the job of survival, getting you clothes, getting you shelter. And the ego is a fragile instrument, because in order for the ego to sort of develop to flower, in order to develop into a real asset and not a liability, inside yourself, you have to journey from a job, i.e., what can I do to survive? I'll never survive here, to a career, meaning your interior, you have to develop a deeper sense of being able to trust yourself, being able to know yourself. You have to awaken deeper instincts in yourself. It's not enough at the physical ego level to know how to strike a match and turn on water and cook a meal. You have to develop deeper instincts in yourself. You have to be able to trust yourself and have faith in yourself. So you have to develop a relationship with yourself. These two profound graces are not given to you. You have to develop them. They're like little jewels inside of yourself, little seeds that you actually have to nurture. And this is where conscience comes in. You have to actually nurture faith and trust in yourself. And if you don't, you will never have faith and trust in anything or anybody. You will always say to people, but do you really think so? Do you really think so? Do you really think so? And you still won't believe them. You won't believe or trust anything. And your whole life will be that way. And you will drain people constantly, because you will become one of the worst things a person can become, which is needy. You will become needy. And you'll send cards to people like, say, if you leave me, I will die, which my response, die, but don't ever send me this kind of thing again. Don't you ever do that again. Stand on your own 2 feet. And that takes faith and trust. And you develop faith and trust by first never, ever, ever breaking your word to yourself. And that starts out with something small, like this is how you begin to hear your intuition, to actually become mindful of your inner wiring, so that you're not just responding to what you see, but you're responding to inner perception. So now you start with a more sophisticated wiring. I got a feeling, got a hunch. It's not just what I see, it's what I hunch. So you say to yourself, I get this feeling I should walk and get some exercise. Well, then you say to yourself, I'm going to start doing that. Don't lie to yourself. Don't bullshit yourself. Get off the couch and go walk. Never lie. So if you make a bargain with yourself, like William James, suffer not one exception, go. And as you do that, you're going to have to go through your inner saboteur. Yeah, you don't feel like it today. Go tomorrow. And if you lie to yourself, you'll lie to others. You are a liar. Simple as that. Be honest with yourself. You have no faith in yourself. You won't believe anything about anything. So you have to say to yourself, no, I will keep my word to myself. And if you keep your word to yourself, you start developing this extraordinary force of faith and trust in yourself. You believe yourself. And when a hunch comes and says, don't do this, do this, you've earned that voice. And eventually that voice sounds a little stronger. And now you know what true esteem is. It's not about what you say to someone else. It's not about speaking your truth. It's about telling the truth. It's about seeing the truth. It's about hearing the truth and living it.
Very powerful words and spoken very powerfully. You have a way of saying these things and making them stick, Caroline.
I've been accused of that, Jeffrey.
Well, you're clearly very powerful, Carolyn. And I think that also what I've noticed having a few conversations with you now is that you are a very powerful healer, and that you can bring out what might be happening within an individual for them to really look at. And you do it very point blank, like, hey, you don't mince words, and you just want people to like get it quickly. I think you want to help people, like, not pussyfoot around, get to it.
Why would anyone do that? Why would you pussyfoot? First of all, time is your most precious commodity.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of time, and I can't, and you don't have a lot of time. Why would you want someone to not be direct with you? And why would anybody who doesn't want that kind of truth come anywhere near me?
Well, I'm a little puzzled about one thing, and maybe you can clarify this. A moment ago, we were talking about the human race on this planet, and you expressed a lot of disgust, maybe disappointment about how we cling to our weapons and so on. At the same time, I heard you express an enormous belief in the power of each individual. So can you expand a little bit on that? It almost seems like a paradox.
It is a paradox, actually. I think that this universe, our journey, is a very treacherous one, Jeffrey. I think there is nothing simple about what it is to be a human being today. I think people they've never had more opportunity to know their light or to follow the dark. And what makes us so vulnerable is that we are in this place between mythologies where we have dismantled and made unpopular this idea of having faith. And I don't mean faith in religion, I mean faith in something greater than ourselves. And the result of that is that, a lot of the mythologies of religion that hold religions together are too preposterous now to carry us through the next centuries. They don't work. and its evolution is taking them down, because we need a theology that is an ecology, a biospiritual ecological theology that transitions to this idea that the divine is not an off-planet white male in the form of a Messiah or a second coming or a prophet with an intermediary that requires more men. That whole mythology has to come down. And in the coming down, what has happened is people have plus this era of needing to discover how empowered we are has given rise to a type of outlaw narcissism. This idea that we were born for something special, that we need, that all of us are so exceptional. And what we mean by exceptional is that we are transcendent of the laws of nature. We're transcendent. That what the measure, but the way people measure exceptional is that they now hold ordinary in contempt. They name their children things like sunshine, meditation, karma, and they measure being exceptional by privilege, by the laws they do not have to follow. I don't have to wait in line. Well, I know people that can get me in here. They measure being special by not being subject or to anything that could happen to an ordinary person, which is why people will say, I can't believe this happened to me when they get sick. How could this happen to me? And if you look at all of this holistic health and all these food products that they're, all this nonsense, this will guarantee that the ordinary illness won't happen to you. You won't age as fast. You won't da. All of this makes people so vulnerable to thinking that the goal of life is to live long, but don't tell people you live long, how old you are. It makes you get facelifts. So you can't admit how old you are, and then put yourself in an old people's home, and you better have the money to afford that journey. We have become so schizophrenic about what life is, what aging is, what the process is. And there is absolute, and mentioning God or faith is just out of the question. So, and yet the human design is that there's a faith mechanism in us. So that we must have faith in something greater than ourselves. We must. That's one thing we must do. The second thing we must do is confession. We must empty ourselves of things, the choices we have made that are dark. We must hear ourselves say those so that we can retrieve our soul, so that we can consciously say, I won't do that again. So whether or not it is confession this way or some ritual, some cleansing ritual, we must acknowledge, isn't this Holy Week for the Jews to do that? Isn't this the week for that?
Being a secular Jew myself,
I think it's Rosh Hashanah. I think it is.
Yeah, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur were.
This is exactly what that. All right, this is exactly what that's about. That's exactly what that ritual is.
Atonement.
Atonement. We have to have that, and when these are not recognized as psycho-spiritual holy necessities of the soul, therapy does not do this. People end up in spiritual crises, which are no longer recognized. They're treated as depression and drugged. So we've become a drugged culture. We've become an anxiety-prone culture. We've become a hypersensitive culture, a suicide-bent culture. And so many of it has to do with the absence of faith, the absence of knowing what the soul requires, the absence of having a understanding that there is accountability, that it matters how we live. We have epidemics of betrayal, epidemics of darkness. We now show up in business deals with lawyers because we assume the other person's going to cheat us. an absence of integrity. So this is the toxicity level. We now have people who lie in public constantly, nonstop. We have TV stations that lie nonstop, just pour it out there, to where people do not recognize that the soul does not tolerate lies. It is a vessel that's designed for truth. So the whole collective is just in a dark night.
I don't disagree with any of that, but then there's the extraordinary belief that you've expressed in the power of people to change.
But that's just it. I think the power of a person to wake up and to actually get, I got to get out of this belief, I've got to change, is remarkable. The prodigal son, the power of someone to actually get, I can't use my words this way anymore. I can't do this. I will believe in that forever. I will never let darkness win. In my head, in my soul, I will never give up. I will never give up. Because I so believe that the soul in each person is such a powerful vessel. And that the power of one good person is a light that can change the world.
Here is a person who's attended one of your workshops, Carolyn, Louise A. Tio, and they said at a workshop, this is their words, called me out on my anger when a friend drank himself to death. Now I have healed and found Buddhism and power in the mystics and meditation. How do I know who to serve next? Or maybe how to serve next or what to serve next.
You know what? That's not a question I can answer. That's a question you go into prayer for. And just say, show me what to serve. And don't be fussy. Do not be fussy. I mean, excuse me. I beg your pardon.
Oh, it's okay.
Don't be fussy. Service is everywhere, whether you give 50 cents to a homeless person or help someone across the street, or service is everywhere. Just say in your prayers, use me.
Great advice.
Here's a related question from a viewer whose YouTube name is John Adam, who refers back to an earlier remark you made that every prayer is heard. And he says, that's definitely not my experience. Could you explain what you meant?
Well, that doesn't mean it's answered the way we want. Let me explain how prayers are answered. This is the nature of God is law. And heaven, when heaven negotiates a law for a person, it's called a miracle. That's what a miracle is. But as a rule, heaven follows its laws, and so does the darkness, by the way, and incidentally, if you want to understand how darkness works. So if you make a decision and you make a choice, and mind you, every single thought is a choice. So if you have dark thoughts, you are creating, you are participating in acts of creation. Just know that. Hateful thoughts are acts of creation. The consequence of those thoughts are going to play out. They're going to play out. Heaven doesn't come in and say, what are you doing? What are you doing? And let me add, heaven doesn't compensate for stupid or and heaven will not do anything that you can do for yourself. Anything. Heaven will help us do something, but it will not do anything that we can do for ourselves. And heaven answers prayers at the soul level, not the ego. So if we say, I want this person to heal, I want this, that's sorry. Everybody has a life path. I just lost my sister cousin, and I didn't pray for her to live. I prayed for whatever grace could be given to her. And if it was healing, it would be appreciated. But if not, help her on her journey. If you, for example, as I said to this gambler, he says, prayers don't help me get out of this. And I said, well, I'll tell you this. If you're a gambler and you've lost a lot of money, it's really stupid for you to pray to win the lottery, because it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. I'll just tell you that right now. It's never going to happen. But if you said, get me out of this addiction, help me, and then admitted, I don't want out, but get me to the place where I'm at the place where I want to quit gambling or drinking. Get me to want to, and I'll take it from there. And I promise you the grace will be given to you. But you can never tell heaven how to answer your prayers. Never. Prayer, you have to understand the difference between the logical world, the rational world, because your question comes from the disappointment in the ordinary life, and the mystical world. The mystical world is a world that does not operate with reason. It doesn't operate in our world. It doesn't operate by the same, it operates in the miraculous. It operates in simultaneity. It operates in wonder. It operates in a way that the rational mind can't comprehend. So one of the prayers I have is when I go to sleep at night, when things are on my mind or something's bothering me, I will say to heaven, this is what's on my mind, and you know that, and I know that. So you take the night shift and figure it out, and I get the day shift. And I will do my best during the day, and you take the night shift and do whatever you need during the night to reorganize things. And when I wake up, I will assume you have been where you needed to be. So prayer is not getting our way. Prayer is, another book I read that was such an influence for me was a book called With God in Russia. And it's about a story of a Jesuit who's now up for sainthood. Fascinated me. His name is Walter Ciszek. Was Walter Ciszek. And what fascinated me about everything about him fascinated me, but I wonder if I have his book right behind me somewhere. Because I keep Walter near me. He became a priest. He became a Jesuit. And then in the 1930s, the Vatican had a program that they wanted to train Jesuits and sneak them into the Soviet Union, the then Soviet Union, to see if they could administer to Catholics that were being repressed under communism. But by 1938, it became obvious to the Vatican, that there was going to be a war, and so they thought no. But Walter, who is by this time fluent in Russian and fluent in Polish, he grew up bilingual, said, well, as long as I'm here, at least assign me to Poland. And the war had not yet started. So he goes to Poland, but he's on the eastern end. The war happens, the Russians invade. And right before they invaded, he said, well, as long as I'm here, why don't I just wander over to Russia, which he did. He took off his collar, left his American passport at the seminary, and he got a job at a forestry operation in Russia. The Russians come in, they find his passport, they track him down, and he ends up in this Soviet prison for the next 24 years of his life. Brutal under Stalin, beaten up, starved, everything. But in his story, he tells of how things like this, and I read his book through the whole night. I couldn't put it down. I had been reading The History of the Jesuits by James Martin, and he was mentioned. And then I kindled his book and I could not put it down. So I was up all night reading it. And in it, he spoke about how there was this revolt among the prisoners. They were freezing, they were starving. The guards come in and they're beating them up. And Walter was only 5'2". He got pushed to the side. And while he was hit, he wasn't hit hard, but he fell and he ended up in the corner. And in that moment, at 4:05 in the morning, I sat back and I got it. I got something at a level I never understood in my life before. And that's that Walter couldn't get out of where he was. For some reason, he had to be there. His whole story was how he ministered to these prisoners in this horrible situation. Horrible, horrible. But every time something happened, he somehow was put into the safest corner, or somehow ended up with an extra piece of bread. So while heaven couldn't get him out of there, they did what they could while he was there. And then when he was released, he's in Siberia. He can't get out. He's in this little town that formed outside the prison from these ex-prisoners who are still being watched by the KGB. And he goes and writes a letter to his sister, and it manages to get out. They actually mail it. And it actually goes to the United States. He's assuming his sister's at the same address. He hadn't been in touch for 24 years. She gets a letter from him. And she goes to the Jesuits and says, my God, he's alive. They went, the Jesuits, to the President of the United States, who at the time was Catholic, John F. Kennedy. And he did a prisoner exchange and got him out. And on his way out, he said he blessed the country that had given him so much. In that story, in his story, I realized that our lives are truly mystical journeys. We don't understand things that happen to us or why. We don't. But the role of prayer and grace is that sometimes a contract. We are assigned routes that could be unbearable, but heaven will make them as bearable as possible. Parents who are given children who are handicapped. I know one mother, she has 3 autistic children, 3 seriously autistic children. That is unbearable, but she has to bear it. She has to. One of my good friends, not far from here, all 3 of her children died. She has to bear that. I mean, life is full of these unbearable, unexplainable experiences because we think life should be fair and just. 2 things, even Jesus, even Buddha, every great teacher said, stop it. That's why you're suffering. You want life to be what it will never be, fair, just, logical, and safe. Give up the need to know why things happen as they do. I feel like I'm sermonizing. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're doing, no, people, there's a lot of great comments coming in the chat, Carolyn. People are, they're giving you the yes explanation and they're loving what you're saying. There's a question here from, and by the way, we're under 10 minutes here and we're going to end the live stream here just shortly, but somebody's asking here, Rafael Reyes says, do you have any advice on alcoholics that don't want to be healed? Or maybe, I know, is that too big of a question at the end of the?
You're talking to someone who buried a brother from alcoholism.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay.
All right. So I failed at being able to help my brother out of alcoholism. So I'm just going to tell you that right now. We went through in my family years and years and years and years. So Jesus, I know the journey. I know it inside out and I know it intimately. And I am a big, big fan of AA and its teachings and its program. And And I have to say that I think addiction is a stage in the human journey that everybody goes through, whether you're addicted to a drug or you're addicted to attention or you're addicted to power or clothes or whatever the hell you're addicted to. But everybody has to acknowledge in themselves that there is something they're addicted to. And some of those addictions are so strong, they're at the perfume level instead of the toilet level, that you lose your power over, you negotiate your power. And from that, your money, your wealth, your family, my brother lost everything. And it didn't matter, his wonderful kids, his wonderful wife, his job was nothing next to Stolichnaya vodka, right? Doesn't make any sense. And so that's where I think my counsel to you, not advice, but deep counsel, is that the journey of the addict demands that you realize it's not your journey. It's the addict's journey. 2, that you really, truly have to make a decision to protect yourself, or the addict will destroy you. The addict will destroy you. And that if you have to say, look, I'm sorry, but I can't live with this addiction. If you think you can change the addict by begging, pleading, you can't. It's not possible. It's not until they truly wake up that you can, that they can make the decision that they have reached that point of the breaking point. That's what I have to say. But here again, even if you look at the AA program, it's totally based on prayer, and support. And the whole idea that without God, I'm not going to get through this. And in the first 90 days, you have to be there in this collective tribal grace center, this network of grace, because you can't get through it without thinking of your fabric being woven together, because it's so fractured, but woven together by the grace, well-meaning, and prayers of all these people that you gather with. And what they're doing is they're weaving a field of grace around you so that the darkness of temptation, lead me not into temptation, it can't get into you. It's time for me to go.
Carolyn, thank you for all that you've shared here today. Do you have any upcoming events that you want to share, or how people can contact you? I know some of our moderators have been putting like your website and so forth in the chat for people, and we'll have that down below as well.
Well, I do have that wonderful class coming up starting this Tuesday with Tanmeet, and on Joy is My Justice, which I think is going to be just terrific. It's 4 evenings, Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Thursday. I have a workshop. I'm going back overseas to do a workshop with people to Assisi, and that will be next June, and that's on my website. And then I'm doing one in Sedona in January, and one in Santa Fe at the end of this month. So yeah, so there's a couple of workshops coming up. It's good after COVID to get back out.
Wonderful.
Well, it's been a real joy to be with you, Carolyn. I hope that we have more opportunities in the future.
Oh, I'm sure. It's been a pleasure to be with both of you and with your audience. I mean, it's just been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Bless you.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you all for being with us today.
Before we close, let me just remind our viewers that we do offer a free weekly newsletter and a free quarterly magazine that you can download from the New Thinking Aloud Foundation website, which is newthinkingaloud.org.